boy. All right, we'll try the new thing and see if this is better or worse than when I was using the live, because LinkedIn Live wasn't really that super good and fun most of the time. Anyway, good thing is, if you're smart nowadays, you do your content live and then you record and then you parse and then you use it for other stuff. So here we are. All right. It is 5:25, May 25th, 2023 at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 1300 for you military types. It's been a busy week. Let's get off with the digital saber rattling that is going on. If you're unfamiliar with what's been taking place lately, there's this conflict going on in Russia, Ukraine. So that's a thing. And then there's this other thing going on over near China. Now, the FBI today or yesterday, I believe, one of the two published an advisory that talked about what's going on with this thing called Volt Typhoon. There was a thing called Living Off the Land, the joint advisory from all Five Eyes. So if you're not familiar with the Five Eyes, those are our partners, I guess you could call it: Australia, Canada, New Zealand, UK, and the United States. Reports a major Chinese cyber espionage operation that succeeded in penetrating a range of U.S. critical infrastructure sectors. Microsoft, in its own report on Volt Typhoon, as the threat activity is being called, says the group has been active since the middle of 2021. The targets of the spying: manufacturing, utility, transportation, construction, maritime, government, information technology, and education sector, so all critical infrastructure. Microsoft writes that observed behavior suggests the threat actor intends to perform espionage and maintain access without being detected for as long as possible. That sounds very much like typical APT operations. It does this, the Five Eyes report stresses, by carefully living off the land. In other words, exploiting existing legitimate administrative tools and privileges to do what they're going to do. Much of Volt Typhoon's activity has been directed against Guam. If you're not familiar with Guam, it's an island out there in the Pacific. Now, here's what's really interesting. Guam, over the course of the last X number of weeks and months, has been a place where the U.S. has been strategically positioning, and this is public knowledge, it's not going to get me in trouble, strategically positioning resources to basically kind of rattle the sabers at the Chinese. You put stuff in Guam, especially when we started moving nuclear capable bombers over there and doing elephant walks, which is where you run all your gear up and down the flight line and whatever else, and you have the largest aircraft carrier in U.S. history mysteriously kind of show up in that area, all to say, if you want to go, let's go. So I've said this for a long time, and a lot of people think this is accurate. Espionage, right? You have espionage, then you have cyber, then you have kinetic war. What you're seeing right now is the gap being bridged between espionage and kinetic warfare. The next thing to happen here is kinetic warfare. You can only go so far, and when you're in a space where there's this much stuff, like the Yellow Sea, Taiwan, China, Guam, we're sending Navy ships over there. We've got Marine Corps elements in place. It's not a very big space to be playing around in. Something goes wrong, something goes haywire, escalation of force, et cetera, you're looking at the potential for kinetic conflict. And if you follow what happened in Ukraine and Russia, right? Look at Estonia, look at all those other all those other countries that were attacked before Ukraine got kinetically attacked. Cyber bridges the gap between traditional espionage and kinetic warfare. So the point that I'm trying to make is we are seeing the early indicators of a coming conflict with China, I think. Now, am I an expert on China and warfare doctrine? No. But does this make sense? Yes. So know that. And of course, it wouldn't be a thing without my dogs barking at something, because that's just what they do. So that's number one. There's an interesting report that came from Veeam. I believe that's how you say it. VEEM. EAM about ransomware. And I went through the whole thing, but here's the statistic that's super interesting. 70%, 77% of ransoms were paid by cyber insurance companies, but insurance companies are catching on. What does that mean? Well, it means that cyber insurance companies are becoming aware that they are getting their ass handed to them by having to pay out when things are going wrong because of a ransomware incident. So, what do they start doing? If you look at the report, it tells you very quickly 21% of organizations found out this year that ransomware is now being, quote, specifically excluded from cybersecurity insurance. So you're going to go pay for that, even though if you read the fine print, it says we're not going to cover a ransomware event. On top of that, 74% of organizations saw their premiums for cybersecurity insurance increase this year. 43% saw increased deductibles. So if you're sitting around wondering and waiting about whether or not cyber insurance is going to get cheaper, it's not. It's going to keep getting worse. And these organizations that are issuing those policies, they're not stupid. They're not going to lose money for the sake of losing money. The fact that they are starting to whittle down on this stuff and that they are writing these new exclusions and finding out new ways to legalese their way out of payment should be notable. I have a contract with an organization. I have to have $1 million cyber security insurance policy for just me. They didn't validate or verify anything on my network or my home or my accounts or whatever. They just said, here's what it costs. Do I have any faith that that would ever get paid out? Nope. But just know that if you're buying cybersecurity insurance, it's going to keep getting more expensive. As more organizations get breached and as more payouts occur, it will. That's just the nature of insurance. And if you're sick of hearing me bitch about cyber insurance, I don't know what to tell you. It's going to keep happening because it is a thing. Let's see. Ericsson. So this is on checkmarks, marx.com. Ericsson sensitive data exposure via trace.axe. This is by David Sopas, S-O-P-A-S. Checkmark security research team reached out to Ericsson's responsible disclosure program, bug bounty, notifying of the finding on the 14th of March, 2023. It says it was fixed on April 2023. And this is ASP.NET web applications that run with tracing enabled may publicly expose sensitive information. The feature allows any user to view diagnostic information about a single request from ASP.NET page. If this feature is enabled, Trace Viewer, which is the program trace.axe, may be publicly accessible without server's root auth. The Checkmark security research team discovered this vulnerability and will explore what it means for users in this post. One of the subdomains for Ericsson, which was forecast.ericsson.net, this is all fixed, so this should be fine, was found to have this, and it redirected to another one, blah, blah, blah. So basically what happened was if this plugin was enabled, you could do some redirection and you could see information spill across those connections. PII data, not credit card, but passwords and whatever else. And when you read through the rest of it, it's because there's a connection between two systems. If you sit there and do the right things, it sends the information in plain text, which is not good. It's not encrypted. It's whatever. So there's a lot of folks wondering about like security of APIs and being able to do this. And is this a real risk and whatever else? There you have it. API security, interaction, web applications, et cetera, like those are really simple avenues for exploitation. And if they're not managed, maintained, controlled, and secured, they're going to lead to additional exploits. That's just what it is. And this is Ericsson, which is a 160-year-old company, hundreds of thousands of employees globally. And if it can happen to them, it can dang sure happen to anyone else. So know that. This report is in security affairs.com, and I will butcher the person that wrote this, but taken down a while back. They weren't taken down. You just got some people that were in that mix, and now it's just moved and jumped into another thing, and they're back, and they're using the same sort of malware stuff. Now you can actually go read through this report, and it talks about what tool to get a foothold on the victim's networks. They then use OpenSSH and impact it to move laterally and deploy clop ransomware payloads. So there's a couple things here that stand out. Number one, the weird nameology that we have, the nomenclature that's, the thing in this space continues to be confusing and confounding. Like Fin7 and Clop and Sangria, Ninja Fart, and whatever else, like, it doesn't help clarity's sake. Like, you have to do the research to figure out the name so you know what the fuck they're talking about. Now, if you go look at the Power Trash script, Malpedia, which I look at pretty regularly, has got this thing about ps1.powertrash actors, Fin7, PowerShell written malware is an in-memory dropper used by Fin7 to include payload. According to Mandiant's blog article, there's Mandiant's blog article, and then you go into Mandiant's blog article, and Fin7 Power Hour, Adversary Archaeology and the Evolution of Fin7. This was April 4th, 2022. So this is a long read. It's a 25-minute read if you go through this thing. And they did a really good job of going through the whole thing. But I guess the question that occurs to me is, if we know so much about this and it's this well documented, how is this still something that is going after these organizations? Because number one, all you got to do to really exponentially reduce the risk from this would be eliminate PowerShell. I don't normally talk about companies and technologies, but I'll just say this for flat out, like ThreatLocker is one of the best that I've found in the market that does things around taking care of inventory of applications and assets, and then being able to ring fence them, block them off, allow list, block list, whatever you want to call it, and do your thing. There's no reason the majority of people that are using computers need PowerShell. I have PowerShell on this machine. I don't need it. I've never once used it, other than to do some demonstrations and things like that. It's a risk, so it should be shut off. That's the type of administrative stuff that should happen. But from personal experience working with a variety of organizations, they'll push out a mobile device management or a Jamf or a what's that other one that everyone uses now? Gotta remember the name of the thing, Kanji, and they're still allowing you to execute PowerShell, but PowerShell is what's being used to execute ransomware, and I'm not using PowerShell, so why wouldn't we shut that down and kill it? If you want to reduce the threat and risk of ransomware, PowerShell is a really good thing to shut off. And there are tools, and not endorsing ThreatLocker or whatever, I just know them very well, and I've seen their stuff and demoed it a lot. You can easily stop ransomware with PowerShell, ring fencing, and etc. So know that. I mean, it's pretty clear. There's a lot of kerfuffle going on around funding in this space, which is interesting because when you actually do the research and look at what's going on, the funding's not dried up. So this is ITES Novarica, which interesting, but submitted by Tari Schreider. This is on Wednesday. So basically, how has venture capital been disrupted in cybersecurity? They looked at a 1,346 startup and scale investments from 2019 in April to 2019 and 2023. So for a pretty good span of time, the results were somewhat expected. The gloomy investment picture reported by the press was not as dire as depicted, but it contained cautionary tales. In that period of time, nearly 50 billion has been poured into cybersecurity companies. The research shows a post-pandemic lockdown increase in investment deals. However, VC and PE are injecting less capital per deal. Investment firms are more cautious and valuation multiples dropped substantially over the past 2 years. I can tell you that from personal experience. These firms have fewer choices owing to both fewer new cybersecurity startups and founders waiting for valuations to rise on existing vendors. There's a combination of factors. And if you look, there's a graph that they've done here. 5 years of cybersecurity investments are rising. 2019, 6.8 billion. 2020, 7.3. 2021, everybody went remote, 18.85, which that was a really good time if you were going to sell a cybersecurity company to be doing it. Post-pandemic, 2022-ish, 13.8. So you start to see a drop there. And then now return to normal is actually about half of what it was in 2019. But the key findings of the study include that the number of investment deals being made is the highest since the pandemic. 19 investment deals were closed monthly in 2019. Today, that number is 33. The levels have remained relatively consistent over the past 3 years. So the funding has not dried up. Average investment deal size is shrinking, however. It was 27.9 million, it got all the way up to 52.5 million, and now is at about 28. So not really that much shrinking when you consider that there was a anomaly, a spike because of COVID. Deals take longer. Series A's around occur where a company reached 3 years of age. I don't even know how that's a thing because most Series A companies I talk to now, they're getting funding like a week after they decide to have a logo. All important Series A rounds taking longer as investors exhibit more caution and founders wait for higher valuations. Investment firms are playing it safe. Less than 10% of investments flow into emerging cybersecurity technologies such as AI, blockchain, and blah, blah, blah. Vendors is dropping. The number of vendors is dropping substantially. In 2019, 186 new vendors were founded. In 2022, that number dropped to 60, which is a 68 or 70-ish% decrease. Based on the current pace of emerging cybersecurity companies, this decline has continued into 2023. That's probably also part of because the market is so saturated. I mean, you can only come up with so many ways to solve a relatively finite problem. Valuations have dropped by 60%. Crazy numbers were pre-pandemic, 30 times the 12-month revenue, which was monster. The numbers on average were about 17 times multiple. Today, they're only about 7 if you're lucky. Founders' business model should not include an IPO. Fewer than 100 public cybersecurity companies exist out of the estimated nearly 10,000 worldwide that are IPO'd. Cybersecurity companies are considered more likely to be acquired than to achieve an IPO or public offering. So the real stuff that's there is that the investment market has not dried up. It's reduced back to normal before the pandemic, and it's come down a little bit. But you could also say that this happened for a variety of reasons. Number one, the economy's in a tailspin. Number two, we're looking at national default. Number three, everyone's trying to figure out what work looks like for the near future and how you employ security controls and those types of things around it. And then where does it go from here? So if you're coming into the space, it's still a fine place to be. The water is fine. However, the valuations are not as ridiculous as they were. You're lucky to get a 7x multiple if you do exit right now, which is still not bad depending on what you're doing, but it's not the 50 that some organizations were getting in 2021. But the money is still coming in. And the fact that there's a reduction in the number of cybersecurity companies probably is more of a thing of consolidation has begun to occur. The market is starting to drive some stuff off of the table. And a lot of the things that were like legacy sort of security fixes because of the migration to cloud and these new ways of working have just died on the vine. So, whatever that's worth to you, know that that's the thing. Now, lastly, this is in Reuters or Reuters or however the hell you say. This is interesting. So, FBI misused intelligence database in 278,000 searches. The court says by Zeba Siddiqui, I think. A U.S. court found that the FBI improperly searched for information in a U.S. database of foreign intelligence 278,000 times over several years, including Americans suspected of crimes, according to a ruling released on Friday. The decision by Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, which I'll talk about in a minute, was released by the ODNI, the Office of Director in 2020. The database stores digital information on individuals. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act allows the FBI to search without a warrant for communications of foreigners abroad, including conversations with Americans. So having been someone that's worked in government spaces where we had to deal with FISA and those whatever, there's a whole bunch of things that you can and cannot do. And there's a whole bunch of things that are huge, giant no-nos. And the moment you're doing stuff, depending on who you are and what your legal authority is, we call them title authorities, there's things that you can do and things you can't. If you're a domestic law enforcement agency like the FBI, you have to abide pretty much by the rules. There's always some tangential cases of the American judicial system with warrants and whatever else and all the privacy and everything else to look for the things you're going to look for, especially when you're talking about digital surveillance. If you're the NSA or the CIA or some of those other organizations that do things internationally, you can use other title authorities to do other things. There's not really a way to kind of go back and forth and do these things. However, depending on where those individuals that are at those different organizations work and accesses and whatever, there's always the possibility that someone has access to those databases and can look in things and use them improperly. And I say with absolute certainty, if you're working at Fort Meade and you do something that's outside the bounds of FISA, you're going to get your ass handed to you and your career is probably over if you don't wind up in jail. FBI is different, but the thing that they did that was wrong here, especially when you're talking about January 6th investigation and George Floyd and whatever else, there's an issue there because that's a domestic thing. And the likelihood of you finding some person that was at January 6th who's involved in some international terrorist plot that would give you the justification to do a FISA search on them communicating with external parties, pretty slim. So 1 or 2 times or 10 times, you could probably get away with that. 250,000 times, probably going to get some people in trouble. And this is a violation of people's rights, which is an issue. So the court ruling found violated rules around the database created under Section 702 of the FISA Act. Specifically, the court found that searches as part of probes into crimes between 2016 and 2020 violated the rules because there was no reasonable basis to expect that they would return foreign intelligence or evidence of crime. Although the FBI said that that was reasonably likely. So, yeah. As a result of compliance incidents, do not reflect FBI's querying practices subsequent to the full deployment of remedial measures, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, the FBI is having to cover their ass a bit on that one because that's a no-no. And whoever those folks were that were doing that stuff, they probably got in some pretty deep trouble. Depending on where you work in the intelligence community, you have to abide by very specific rules. You have to take a lot of training. You have to do a lot of stuff to know what you can and can't do and whatever else. And there's actually some weird things that happen based on what goes on with foreign intelligence and domestic surveillance and terrorism and FISA and Patriot Act and whatever. Like if you've never worked in those spaces, it would make no sense to you. And you'd probably be like, what? This is crazy. But just know that it seems like people freak out about the government like surveilling you here in the US. Unless you're doing something wrong, you probably don't have a reason to be worried about it. However, this is interesting to see that they were found with their hand in the cookie jar for using a system that's built for different purposes under different authorities for the purposes of foreign intelligence, and then trying to tie it to a domestic incident. And pretty much knowing that you wouldn't stand up in court and say, oh, we were looking for communications with a foreign intelligence officer because of a George Floyd protest or because of some dude putting his boots up on Nancy Pelosi's desk. Like that stuff is not going to fly. So there's strange things that happen there. But for those that aren't aware of it, that's kind of how things work to some degree without getting myself into trouble on the classified side. Anyway, 25 minutes, 5:25, kind of cool. Those both synced up. Trying a new thing on YouTube. I seem to like it a little better. It's not nearly as clippy and kludgy as I was having problems with LinkedIn. And of course, this content will go out. If you're not subscribed to my channel, please do. I'm not trying to make money off of this stuff. I want to donate money to charity and help people out where we can. And then I've got the Patreon page, which I put the link on there as well. So it's all about doing what's right for the community and for others. Anyway, As always, stay smart, stay safe, stay secure. Catch you on the next one.